Hi, Scott from Digital Fish with content that catches, and a quick little video on the pros and cons of using braid and mono off the rocks. If you've done a fair amount of fishing off the rocks, you've probably wondered before, should I use braid or should I use mono off the rocks? Well, there's pros and cons to using either one. I have outfits which are both, which I use off the rocks, and it depends on the outfit itself, depends on the location I'm fishing and the species that I'm fishing for. For example, if I'm fishing around the east coast off Auckland off the rocks, I tend to use 15 kilo braid. This outfit here, this is what I tend to use. It's light, it's fairly strong. I'm fishing off sandstone ledges. I can cast fairly far, so I find it really good. If I'm fishing off the far north, I tend to fish 15 kilo mono on this kind of outfit. The rocks in the far north are a bit more brutal and unforgiving, so I tend to use 15 kilo mono instead. So, pros and cons of using mono off the rocks. First off, first advantage is mono is cheaper than braid by quite a bit. And although braid has become cheaper over the years, it's still more expensive than mono pound for pound. Second advantage of mono over braid. Mono can stretch a bit more than braid, and this can be quite significant if you're fishing. You've got a good fish on, you've got a heavy drag on, and particularly if you've got heavy swell and you're trying to pull fish through, the mono will actually stretch a bit more. Braid will just snap, and so small advantage, but it can be an advantage of mono over braid. Third advantage of mono over braid. Mono has a bit more resistance to punishment compared to braid. So 15 kilo mono versus 15 kilo braid. If you've got the same fish on in the same rocky terrain, the braid will snap before the mono does if it's being scraped over the rocks. Not by an awful lot, but I think mono definitely has a bit more wear and tear, abrasion resistance to it. Some of the disadvantages of mono over braid. You can't fit as much mono on your spool as what you can with braid, because obviously mono is thicker than braid. This isn't always a big disadvantage, but in some situations you do want more line on your reel. I've got an outfit for a land-based marlin. I need as much line as I can get on that reel because I can't chase a marlin off the rocks. So there are some circumstances where mono is a bit more of a disadvantage simply because it is thicker and you can't get as much on your spool. Second disadvantage of mono over braid. Mono breaks down a lot faster in sunlight than what braid does. And after 1 or 2 seasons of fishing off the rocks in the sun, you definitely want to change the mono because it will start to get weaker. Whereas braid can last quite a lot longer. I've got braid on some of my reels, it's about 8 years old and it's still just as strong. I haven't noticed any change in my knot strength or loss of breaking strain. Disadvantage number 3, you can cast further with braid than what you can with mono. And particularly if using lightweight baits or baits without any sinker, and you still need to try and cast it as far as you can, you'll cast further with braid than you can with mono. So pros and cons of fishing braid over mono. As I've mentioned, you can fit more line on your spool with braid. This is quite good, so even if the first 20, 30, 40 meters starts to get scuffed up or washed out, you can still remove that and it won't affect the amount of line you have in your spool as much as if you were fishing mono. Little tip here to make it last longer, you can take it to the tackle shop and get them to switch it around so the top section is now the bottom section attached to the spool, and you can make it last longer. You can do it yourself if you've got time and some spare spools as well. Second advantage of braid over mono. You can actually feel bites a lot better with braid than what you can with mono. Particularly if the fish are biting quite lightly, you'll feel the bites with braid over mono. And this was a big deal, particularly when braid first came out for surf fishermen, where there's heavy swell, because it's a thinner diameter, you can feel the braid, you can feel the bite, a lot easier. And it's also really good because it has less drag in the water and there's little or no stretch to braid, so you'll feel the bites better. So a couple of disadvantages of braid. I've mentioned this a bit already with mono. It is more expensive and it is less abrasion resistant. Just a tip here though, you can use a longer leader when using braid, and that can save you sometimes. So braid, mono, both are good options depending on how you like to fish. Well, it's starting to rain now, so I better go. There you go, pros and cons, help you make some good choices with your outfits and the places you're fishing and what kind of fish you're trying to chase. Scott from Digital Fish, content that catches.